Welcome to our countdown of the top 10 lesser-known serial killers. These individuals may not have received the same level of notoriety as some of their more famous counterparts, but their crimes are no less shocking and disturbing. Let's begin. Number 10. Carl Panzram. Active from 1920 to 1929, Panzram murdered at least 21 people across the United States. He targeted vulnerable individuals, including homeless men and young boys. Panzram's crimes were marked by brutality and randomness, as he often used violence to cope with his own traumatic experiences. Thankfully, he was eventually caught and executed for his crimes. What drove Panzram to lash out at society in such a violent manner? Could his crimes have been prevented with proper intervention? Number 9. Pedro Alonso Lopez. Known as the Monster of the Andes, Lopez murdered over 300 girls in Colombia, Peru, and Ecuador during the 1960s and 70s. His methods were calculated and ruthless. Lopez's crimes went largely undetected for years due to societal attitudes toward women and girls, and his eventual capture led to widespread outrage and calls for justice. It's upsetting that Lopez managed to evade capture for so long, and what his case reveals about society's failure to protect their most vulnerable populations. Number 8. Joseph James DeAngelo, also known as the Visalia Ransacker. DeAngelo committed over 120 burglaries, 13 murders, and 50 rapes across California between 1974 and 1986. Incredibly, he was a former police officer. DeAngelo's crimes were marked by a disturbing pattern of voyeurism and obsession. His eventual capture in 2018 brought some closure to the victims' families, the very people he took an oath to serve and protect. DeAngelo's desire for control and domination certainly influenced his crimes, and gave the world a glimpse into his twisted psyche. Number 7. Leslie Allen Williams. Williams murdered and raped 4 teenage girls in the early 1990s. His methods were brutal and calculating. Williams' crimes were marked by a disturbing lack of empathy, and veered into deep depravity. This is confirmed by his necrophilic dealings with his victims after he had dispatched of them. His eventual capture resulted in a life sentence without the possibility of parole. What factors contributed to Williams' descent into violence, and could his crimes have been prevented through earlier intervention? Number 6. Robert Hansen. Active from 1971 to 1983, Hansen abducted, raped, and murdered at least 17 women in Alaska. His methods were among the most ruthless and sadistic one could imagine. Hansen's crimes were marked by a disturbing pattern of hunting and control. Many of those he abducted were released into the wilderness, where Hansen would then hunt them with gun and knife in tow. His eventual capture led to widespread outrage. He was sentenced to 461 years for his crimes, without the possibility of parole. Hansen died of natural causes in 2014 while incarcerated. Number 5. Albert Fish. Fish murdered at least 3 children in New York during the 1920s. His atrocities are believed to be far greater and even more depraved than this modest number, though. He was known by many nicknames during his reign of terror, among them the Gray Man, the Brooklyn Vampire, and, perhaps most fitting, the Boogeyman. Fish's crimes were marked by a disturbing pattern of sadism and masochism. He was obsessed with sexual mutilation and cannibalism, and had a penchant for torture. Although he was only convicted of 3 murders, he is believed to be responsible for at least 10 more, and was famously quoted as boasting he had a child in every state. To this day it is not known whether that referred to rapes or cannibalization. Fish was captured on December 13, 1934 and put on trial for kidnapping and murder. He was convicted and executed by electric chair at the age of 65. Number 4. Ed Gein. Active from 1954 to 1957, Gein confessed to the murder of 2 women in Wisconsin. However, his story is far more gruesome than what he confessed to. Also known as the Butcher of Plainfield or the Plainfield Ghoul, Gein was a suspected serial killer and confirmed body snatcher. Gein's crimes, committed around his hometown of Plainfield, Wisconsin, gathered widespread notoriety in 1957 after authorities discovered that he had exhumed corpses from local graveyards and fashioned keepsakes from their bones and skin. His grisly crimes have provided inspiration for such movies as Psycho, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and The Silence of the Lambs. Gacy was initially found unfit to stand trial and confined to a mental health facility. By 1968, he was judged competent to stand trial and was subsequently found guilty of the murders for which he confessed. However, he was found legally insane and was remanded to a psychiatric institution. Gacy died in 1984 at the age of 77. He is buried next to his family in the Plainfield Cemetery, in a now unmarked grave. Number 3. H. H. Holmes. Herman Webster Mudgett, better known as Dr. Henry Howard Holmes or H. H. Holmes, was a prolific con artist and serial killer active between 1891 and 1894. Holmes had a lengthy criminal career that included insurance fraud, forgery, swindling, bigamous marriages, horse theft, and murder. Holmes was convicted and sentenced to death for the murder of Benjamin Pittisell, his partner in several of his cons. Holmes became infamous for his so-called Murder Castle, a 3-story building he commissioned in Chicago. Details about the building, along with many of his alleged crimes, are considered exaggerated or fabricated for sensationalism, with some accounts estimating his body count could be as high as 200. Holmes confessed to 27 murders, but not all of his victims could be verified due to his propensity for lying. Holmes was executed by hanging on May 7, 1896. Number 2. Belle Gunness. Nicknamed Hell's Belle, Belle Gunness was a serial killer of Norwegian descent who was active in Illinois and Indiana between 1884 and 1908. Gunness is believed to have killed at least 14 people, most of whom were men she lured to her rural Indiana property through personal advertisements. While this would be horrifying enough, some sources speculate her involvement in as many as 40 murders, making her one of the most prolific female serial killers in all of history. Gunness reportedly died in a fire in 1908, however, due to her body not being recovered, her death was never confirmed. Number 1. Thug Biram. Also known as the King of the Thugs, Thug Biram was the leader of a cult active in central India during the late 18th and early 19th century. He is often cited as one of the world's most prolific serial killers. It is believed he may have been involved in up to 931 murders by strangulation between 1790 and 1840, performed with a ceremonial rummel, a handkerchief-like cloth used by his cult. However, only 125 were confirmed. Biram used his rummel, with a large medallion sewn into it, to execute his killings. Through sheer skill, he could cast the rummel over his victim's neck in a way that caused the medallion to land on their Adam's apple, adding pressure to the throat when he strangled them. That concludes our list of the top 10 lesser-known serial killers. These individuals may not have received the same level of notoriety as some of their more infamous counterparts, but their crimes are no less shocking and disturbing. Thanks for watching. Leave your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for more morbid historical content.